If the Gospels were written in 70 AD, how would that be after the disciples were alive? Don't come for this commenter, they're asking real questions and we're having a real conversation. It's really refreshing, actually. They left this comment on my video talking about how the Gospels were written anonymously. They're not Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John and how we know them. I figured let's just make a video so everyone else could know as well. Let's take the earliest Gospel, which was Mark. The order Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is kind of at random. That's not the order they were written chronologically. Based on the archaeological information we have, Mark at earliest was written around 70 AD, possibly as late as 110 CE. Now time for some assumptions. Let's pretend that Jesus was crucified in 0 AD. That would be the whole after death part of AD. For the sake of argument, let's say that the disciples of Jesus were also the same age. So let's say Mark was 30 in 0 AD. If we were to use this assumptive timeline and assume Mark sat down and wrote pen and paper, this is my gospel, that would make him 100 years old in 70 AD, or 140 in 110. For obvious reasons, he would be dead. Dead people can't write. These are not diaries of the disciple. They're not like, this is what I witnessed, my name is X. Each and every gospel was its own individual book. It was literally just a retelling of, this is the story of Christ. The person said, how are they named then? If they're in the Bible with no names, how did they tell them apart? There was no Bible in this time. There was no one collection of stories that was circulating around. Jesus Christ, I need to start scripting these longer videos. Gospel account may have been told orally before it was actually written down to paper, but once it was, thousands of manuscripts would be copied and handed out and then all taught from just one individual book. It wouldn't necessarily need a name. It would just be the gospel. Which is also why scholars can say that Mark was the first. It appears that Matthew and Luke were written directly using Mark as a source to inspire theirs. They were looking at this one and then reworked the story for theirs. John, the last gospel, is an outlier and comes a whole other thing. That's why it's not included in the synoptic gospels. It has its own reference point. No one really knows what John's going on about. It wasn't until Irenaeus, a church philosopher, came around and decided, like, these are going to be the names. The gospel according to Mark, the gospel according to Matthew, etc. Okay, so they were written 100 years after Jesus died. Why does that matter? Well, when you're reading the Bible, it matters to think, who was the author? Who were they writing to? And what message were they trying to get across? Because if you don't put yourself in that perspective, you can get caught up thinking that they're all talking from one viewpoint, which is not true. In this case, we might know why they were writing, but we don't know who was writing. Because again, the Gospels don't claim to be from the disciples, and they're not written in the first person. They don't say, I saw Jesus do this. I woke up and this. My name is Mark. They're all written in the third person anonymously. A new episode of Untracing Trauma. I have on somebody who's a practicing Mormon currently, and their whole family was LDS, but grew up in abuse, poverty. You know the channel.